Have you ever reached the edge of what your values could hold? That internal line you know you won't cross, even when the world expects you to keep going? Bob Martin lived that moment, and it changed everything. This is the Your Next Success podcast, and I am your host, Dr. Carolyn Sangal. I am a life-first career coach and strategist on a mission to normalize questioning your career, because I believe each of us is made on purpose for a purpose only we can fulfill. The longer we live out of alignment with who we are, what we do best, and why we are here, the more we miss out, and the more the world misses out on what only we can give. The Your Next Success podcast is where we explore how to build a career that truly fuels your life. We talk about self-discovery, smart job search strategies, professional growth, and you will hear stories from people who have navigated big career transitions themselves, so you can create a life-first career and become your own version of authentic success, one that is aligned, meaningful, and truly yours. Today's guest is Bob Martin. He is a former federal prosecutor whose career included complex mob-related cases in Miami. From the outside, it looked like purpose and prestige. Inside, Bob was fighting a quieter battle. The pressure, the moral questions, the anxiety of carrying other people's secrets, and the moment he realized he finally reached a line that he wouldn't cross. That moment set him on a very different path. Bob's undoing and remaking led him to meditation, self-inquiry, and a grounded way of living. He now teaches through his writing, speaking, and guide. What is meditation anyway? He brings depth, honesty, and a rare ability to name the emotional truth beneath achievement, pressure, and internal conflict. This conversation opens the door to a type of turning point many high achievers quietly face. The moment when external success collides with internal truth. Bob walks us through the pressure-filled reality of his years as a federal prosecutor, the mob cases that shaped him, the moral line he refused to cross, and the internal unraveling that pushed him towards meditation. His story reveals something most people feel but rarely name, that clarity often begins in the exact moment your old identity stops working. We explore how the body signals misalignment, why silence becomes a teacher, and how a disciplined mind reorients itself towards peace, purpose, and integrity. If you have ever felt pulled toward a deeper, more grounded version of yourself, Bob's story will resonate. Welcome to Your Next Success. We are located geographically not too far from each other, and I'm super excited to have this conversation with you.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I'm super excited to be here.
Awesome. Well, as you know, one of the things I love talking about is career transitions, outwardly successful, maybe inwardly not fulfilled. So we're going to get into a lot of those things as your journey, as you share your journey with us. And I'm so excited because you've had quite an interest. I find everyone's story to be pretty interesting and compelling. And yours is like interesting, compelling, fascinating, intriguing, all the things at the same time. So could you help our listeners understand? Tell us a little bit about your childhood. Where did you grow up? What did you love to do for fun? And we'll just start there.
You know, our childhoods have so much to do with who we become and how we turn out and the like, and there's so much to share. But I'm going to try to focus a little bit on what I think the things that happened in my childhood that had something to do with how I journeyed, if that's okay. And I think that one of those things is that I didn't grow up in a religious household. My dad was Hungarian royalty and was born in 1898, just to give you a time frame. And so he was in Hungary when World War I occurred, and then when the Bolsheviks, the communists, invaded after the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia they invaded Hungary and they killed off all the royalty. And my father was able to escape. So my mom was Roma Gypsy. And so, everybody killed off the Romas. And so I literally, beyond my grandfather, my one ancestor, I literally had no ancestors. And of course, my dad immigrated to America. And so it's funny, living in North Carolina now, I talk to all of these folks who talk about when their Scottish folks came over in the 1700s and who was part of the American Revolution. And my history of America kind of goes back to 1924 and then takes a right turn to Hungary. So in a way, there's a certain non-permanency, non-groundedness. And then again, so my folks, came to the conclusion that there really wasn't a God that was worth worshiping, considering all of the pain that, had been heaped on their family. And so I just grew up in a non-religious household. And along with everything else, we were in a carnival and we traveled. And my dad found his way to the American dream, talk about careers, through popcorn and cotton candy.
How fun, though. How fun. You know, I, yeah. How fun, though. I mean, come on. If everyone that you've loved, respected, appreciated, all of a sudden is no longer there, you have the opportunity to try to start again. I get it that it's like, if there are people that consider if there is a loving God, then why would all these painful things happen? How does that make any sense? And on the same token, come on, popcorn and cotton candy. It's not
Well,
quite
it
rainbows, but like cotton candy. Let's go.
Yeah,
Turn it
yeah.
into
No,
something sweet. Yeah.
he was walking along with my mom to be, his wife to be. They were actually living in sin in the 1930s. They had shacked up together, so to speak, but they would meet and walk and try to figure out how they were going to make the American dream come true. And walking in Lower Manhattan, my father stopped for a moment and he smelled something, and he looked and he saw on the window, painted, the great new taste sensation from the Midwest, popped corn. And he went in and put down a couple of pennies, and they gave him a big bag, and he tasted it. And of course, something from Hungary, he sounded like Bela Lugosi, like Dracula. He turns to my mom and he goes, these I can sell. There is nobody that would not like these.
That's awesome.
And so they had the $600 that they had saved up, and they bought themselves a copper caramel corn vat and a popcorn machine, and opened a little stand in Rockaway, Queens, New York. And he built that into many, many, many popcorn stands in the subways of New York. He had popcorn stands in the subway stations, even in Times Square. And then the mob came in, and popcorn is an especially good item for money laundering. Anything that has a very little cost and a very big profit margin
Yeah.
is good for money laundering. So they went in and gave him a couple of $1,000s with which he bought a trailer and a truck. And we went on the road in the carnivals. That's just about when I was born. And so they stole all his stores. And so we went on the road. So I was in the carnival for about 10 years, growing up there. And then he came back to New York, and all of a sudden a wonderful opportunity opened up, and he got a lease on all of the concessions in an amusement park. So he was back. And I was growing up in an amusement park in Queens, New York. And in the summers, in the winters, we'd go down to Florida and do state fairs. So we traveled back and forth. Anyway, the big part of that is the lack of a religious upbringing. And then when I was about 15, I read a science fiction story. And that science fiction story brought up a physical law called entropy. And entropy says that things will fall into a state of disorder unless acted upon by an outside organizing force. So I went to my dad and I said, Dad, the universe seems to be pretty well organized. What do you suppose this outside organizing force in the universe is? And he goes, silly, silly question. But that started me on a journey, trying to figure out how the universe works. And I was fascinated by Einstein and the like. Another important piece of my childhood was I read To Kill a Mockingbird, and I fell in love with Atticus Finch.
Okay.
And another thing that happened is I went to see Peter O'Toole and Sophia Loren in the movie adaptation of Man of La Mancha, Don Quixote de la Mancha. And I just loved Peter O'Toole's portrayal of this guy who chased the impossible dream. And so take all that stuff together and you get some idealistic little kid who wants to dream an impossible dream, do it through the law, and doesn't have any religious background. So I was a football player. I went to Boston University. I had a football scholarship there. I broke my ankle. And then I started smoking pot and doing mushrooms for the rest of the school year. And I tell you that because it's an important part of the journey.
Yeah. Do you have a major?
And
Like when you went to college, even though you're going to play football, but did you have to say you were going to study any particular thing? And then how did you choose that?
I took a business major. I had a business major. I was not a very good student. It was more important to play ball than to study.
Yep.
But then in my sophomore year, I both broke my ankle and lost my football career and broke up with my high school sweetheart in the same month. That was October 1969. October 17th at 2 p.m. is when I broke, but who's counting?
But there's certain times in our life where something happens, right? Some, seemingly catastrophic or real catastrophic thing at that moment. And it seems like it's happening to us, and it seems like that's not how it's supposed to go. And then later we realize, oh, I'm so glad that happened.
You're begging this question, which is a real big question in my own mind. I always wonder, is it just coincidence? In other words, do two things happen to happen at the same time? Or is there some synchronicity? Is there some force and some intelligence that surrounds us that brings things together with some kind of intelligent pattern or plan?
Ultimately for good. I'm kind of on that camp, right? Like I don't have data to say it's not that way, so the data seems to support that it might be that way, So
it might be that way.
There's some force, intelligent being. People will call it by different things, and I know in my journey thus far, I can see now how some of those things that seemed really bad at the time have ultimately, they're turning for good and making foundational elements that I'm launching from now. But let's see your story too, right? But the difference is I did have this Roman Catholic underpinning from both families. Not to say that there wasn't questioning, but that was kind of a foundational thing that ran on both sides. My kids now, fun for them, there's Roman Catholic and then there's Hinduism involved. So they're going to have a completely different worldview and ultimate decision of what they choose to do. So
and it works. I mean, I'll just throw a little something in here. Well, if I can I jump ahead?
We can jump up and down and back and forth. This is two friends having a conversation, and that's how real conversations go. They don't necessarily go in chronological order.
So I'm leaving out a big chunk in the middle, but just tell you that I wound up being a Taoist Buddhist and moved to North Carolina. And you know how you just mentioned this idea of being able to start all over again?
Yeah.
Well, through one strange event or another, I wound up becoming a lawyer. I worked for Janet Reno, who was the Attorney General in the Clinton administration, but at that time she was the DA of Miami-Dade County, Florida. We're talking 1970s. We're talking Scarface time, Miami Vice times, cocaine cowboy times. And we hit the mob. As a prosecutor, I hit the mob for $72 million and left the office shortly thereafter. And then the mob came and hired me because I beat their lawyers, so they figured I had to be pretty good. And once I went into private practice, they hired me. And so this leads to a lot of hanging out with some pretty and we're talking the Italian Gambino mob Southern branch. We're talking the Medellin cartel. We're talking these folks I'm hanging out with, and I'm doing some drugs and getting home at 2 o'clock in the morning, leaving at 4 o'clock in the morning. The family life was going to hell, making money hands over fist. People are walking into my office with $9,000 in cash in paper bags.
Did you have, like, what was the family situation? Were you married? Did you have any children?
I was married and I had two very, very young children at the time, yes. Mm-hmm.
And yet this chase of success, or this chase of money, I mean, from one particular perspective, could seem like those people had a lot going for them, from one narrow view.
And they were fun people.
Yeah.
I mean, Johnny, who was the point person in Miami, we had some really good conversations about ethics and honesty and trust and the like. And there's a very, very strong ethic because, they can't go to court to resolve their problems, or they can't go to the police to resolve their problems.
Right.
And the way that they resolve their problems are always last straws. They always try to resolve, because it's bad for business. Violence is bad for business. And so, we had a lot of conversations. A lot of people asked me, weren't you worried working for them? But we had I said, Johnny, I'm not going to do anything illegal. I'm not going to do anything unethical. And he goes, I don't know. And I said to him, well, look, you want to have a lawyer that's trusted by the courts. And a lawyer's reputation, they can build it all their life, but they make one misrepresentation to a judge and it's all over for them.
Yeah.
They can't get anything after that. So you want me to be this way. And he goes, you're right. He says, but just, I want to know the bad news first and, always tell me straight. And we were fine. I wasn't personally fine because, like I said, I was hanging out with them and working my tail off, making a lot of money. And going out with them late at night. And so I was seeing a therapist. Now, this is where
How did you even come up with that, right? Because, this idea that there is therapy, that it is helpful. My grandparents, you're about probably around the age of my parents. So my grandparents and my parents had this view that anything with your mind is for crazy people, and you're not going to go to therapy for that, right? I'm not saying it didn't evolve over time, but that was the message growing up. They're messed in the head. They're messed up in the head, And so to think that something was going to mess with my head, where education and performance and those things kind of came from. But how did you crack open that something like therapy was indeed possibly helpful and that you wanted to partake in it to become holistically better?
I was 315 pounds at the time, and I went to a party. It was a lawyers, good people's party. It wasn't a crazy party. It was a professional event. And I met George Robinson. George Robinson had shock white hair, steely blue eyes. He had a voice that was about as bass or baritone as you can imagine. And he was maybe 5'7", 5'8", but he had an amazing handshake. And we talked for a little bit, and he goes, well, Bob, I'm just going to say, you must have a big personality because you have a big body. It's something along those lines.
Yeah.
Your body reflects your personality. They're both big.
Interesting.
And all of a sudden, the science fiction, everything that kind of, who is this guy and how did that come out of his mouth?
Right.
And then I found out that he was a therapist and that he had this really cool little office behind his house in a Miami kind of jungle with palm trees and fountains and all kinds of cool stuff. He just seemed like a really cool guy. So I decided I would go see him.
Yeah.
And the moment I walked into his office, which was separate from his house, Um, there was a different energy in there that the moment I felt it, it reminded me of the psychedelic experience.
Interesting.
Not that it was as intense, of
Right,
course,
right, right.
but so I go back to that psychedelic experience in college because, and it's funny, I've just met a few people now that are getting guided psychedelic therapy, which is now becoming more acceptable. And if you know the whole history of psychedelics, before Nixon came along, they were really looking at it as a therapeutic thing. And what it does with soldiers and PTSD is just amazing, but that's a whole nother podcast. But that was the same kind of energy. It was this sense of connection to a force that was undefinable and unnameable. And so the moment I walked into his office, I felt it. So I said, this guy has something to offer me because, look, inside I was exhausted. I was tired. I was not living my values in terms of taking care of my family.
Yeah.
I certainly wasn't living my father's values, who was a very conscientious and virtuous man. And so I wanted to know what this guy knew. So now comes the big event. So I was making money hands over foot, and I was trying to build it into more money by investing in this and investing in that. And of course, I was in a fog of cocaine, so I wasn't being very successful towards in anything. And I had already paid off my house by the time I was 35. And now I was looking at having to refinance it to keep up with the investments I made. And I didn't know whether I should do that or not. So I went to him and I said, George, should I refinance my house? And I fully expected that he was going to give me some therapist talk. Well, Bob, I don't know. What do you think you should do? But no, he picked up 3 coins. He shook them and he dropped them on the table and he started doing math. He picked up the coins, dropped them again 6 times. He drew 6 lines on a piece of paper. And then he did some mathematical calculations and he came up with the number 32. And he reached behind him. He got this big book and he opened it up to chapter 32 and he showed it to me. And the name of the chapter was Retreat. And I cursed him out because I thought that my therapist had become a charlatan, had become a witch doctor or something weird.
Yeah.
And stomped out. But it was like retreat was like tattooed on my forehead. And I went back eventually with my tail between my legs and asked him, George, what was that? And he goes, that was the I Ching, the I Ching, pronounced I Ching. And I said, what's that? He goes, it's a Taoist practice. I said, what's Taoism? He said, it's a sister to Buddhism. And tell me more. Turns out that my therapist was the English language translator for Master Watching Me, a 72nd generation Grand Master from the Shaolin Temple. Think about that, 72 generations
That's
of
awesome.
wisdom being handed down from father to son, unbroken lineage.
So do you think
And,
that's what you felt when you first went there?
Well, he was a devotee, and he was one of his top students. So that was there. Well, Master Nee came. Yeah, to answer your question, yes, because Master Nee came the next week to Miami. And when I met Master Nee, whatever doubt there might have been in my mind about the fact that I wanted to know as much as I could about whoever this energy producer was, and whatever it was, left me the moment I met this guy. It's like he looked at you, and he wasn't looking at your eyes. He was looking like 4 inches behind your eyes. And his presence was just amazing. He was 72 years old when I met him. And he was as lithe as a baby. He could sit on his heels. He giggled and laughed all the time. And so we studied under Master Nee for years. And he taught me what it means to master life.
And so you're doing all this fancy law stuff, making a crap ton of money, getting involved with a lot of different people. Now you find this calming force, calming energy. You're learning things about yourself, you're learning things about the world. You meet this awesome source of energy and wisdom and all the things, and you start studying under him. And are you still doing this parallel life where you're calm here at George's and a regular human mess outside? Or how does the one start influencing and affecting the other?
It was very easy because the framework had always been legal and ethical in terms of my work and the courts. I was a respected lawyer, so I didn't have to regain anything like that. The only thing was the family stuff. And I just went to Johnny and I said, Johnny, I got to stop hanging out with you because my family's falling apart. And immediately he said, you got to take care of your family. And so that was, yeah, I understand. You got to take care of your family first. And so that part was easy. Everything was easy until, ...
Yeah.
until Johnny's son got arrested on a 15-year mandatory felony. And then it was, you got to do what you got to do to get him off. You need to help this person know what to say. You need to ignore this. You need to do that. And I said, I can't do that, Johnny. He says, I really hope you'll reconsider. I was in a jam because not only is it unethical to suborn perjury and create evidence, but it's also unethical to not report a lawyer that you know is doing that. So even if he got another lawyer to do it, I would still be in an ethical pickle.
Yeah, yeah. And are you also in a personal pickle? Because who says no to people like that who are powerful in different ways?
I said no, and he asked me to reconsider. And so, just so happened that it was the end of the school year. It was May, and my ex-wife, but my wife at the time, said, let's take the kids up to visit my parents in New York. And so we got in the car and started driving up to New York, and we passed through North Carolina in the springtime. The azaleas were blooming, the dogwoods were out. I took a whiff, and I said, let's move here.
And there must have just been the pretty stuff, not the pollen.
Just the pretty stuff, not the pollen.
Yeah, it's like, come a couple weeks earlier, this whole place is yellow.
That's true. And I went back to Johnny. I said, Johnny, I'm going to move to North Carolina. And he goes, sometimes a man has to move on. This way we can part friends.
Okay.
And he let me go. So, we were talking about this idea of my father coming to America and having a whole rear canvas to paint the life on. I went from first-degree murders and RICO cases and Miami's cocaine cowboy days to my very first trial as I went back to become a prosecutor in a rural county in North Carolina called Alamance County.
Yeah.
And my first case that I had to try was taking antlerless deer. So that was a bit of a culture shock.
It's interesting.
Which, in case your audience can't figure it out, that means killing a deer that doesn't have antlers. And I did not even know that doe deers don't have antlers.
Well, how are you supposed to know? I mean, you were making popcorn and cotton candy and you're traveling all around.
I got a blank canvas to rewrite my life. And so I went through that whole transformation, and then I was given this blank canvas, and I could create whatever life I wanted to create. The past was history.
Interesting.
And it was just a wonderful, another one of those, and you look at all of these events falling into place. So then eventually I was a different person. I was a different person at that point than my wife married.
Yeah.
And that person didn't dovetail. And so that marriage ended. And shortly thereafter, I met my current wife, who is a saint, or in Buddhism we say a bodhisattva. And she also was a Bible literalist Southern Baptist, evangelical.
Yep.
So all of her, but we met on our values, because by then I gave up making money. I went and I started just representing indigent people. And for the next 15, 18, 20 years, that's all I did was public service work. And she, I guess, saying she's a saint. If somebody is in need of something, she just moves in. And if anybody ever says thank you, she goes, "What are you thanking me for? I mean, it had to be done." It's just,
Yeah.
it's just her way. And her family is down in Moultrie, Georgia, which is very, very evangelical. They all thought that she was getting yoked to a heathen. And she even once came to me and said, "I'm very sad because I love you so much, and I just hate it that you're not going to go to heaven with me because I hadn't been saved." And I said to her, "Well, I'm sorry that you're not going to be reincarnated with me." And I got a good slap for that. But that led me to writing my second book. And that book was a biblical reimagination of the ancient Chinese scriptures from Taoism and Buddhism. And I started to write it as a Rosetta Stone, and as I started to translate, that pithy Chinese way into the kind of more unpacked Western Christian language, she looked at me and she goes, "Well, your stuff's not that weird." And so we found a way to communicate our cosmologies, and then eventually I joined her church, not her church, but we found a very progressive Christian church under the United Church of Christ. And I went and I told the pastor what my cosmology was. He goes, "You're good." And so we found a church that was broad enough in its thinking to allow for both my Taoist, Buddhist, Christian ways and her evangelical ways. And we both live in it because the church is very service-oriented. Woo!
Imagine what your life would be like if your career aligned with who you are, what you do best, and actually fueled the life you want. At Next Success, we support all ages and stages through career transitions, from students exploring majors or careers to job seekers actively searching or reimagining their next move to professionals committed to self-awareness and leadership growth. Stay connected and explore what's possible at nextsuccesscareers.com and follow Next Success Method on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook.
That's amazing, though. It's just like who would plan all of this? Yeah. Now let's talk about because this part isn't clear. I think I know a little bit about this part from listening to you on some other ones. But so you're doing the football thing back at Boston, right? And you're kind of studying business because it seemed like a good idea, and then somehow that finishes. But then the transition into law school. Let's talk a little bit about how that came about, because that had not been your initial thought, right? Like on one hand, correct me if I'm wrong, on one hand, your view as a child growing up with popcorn, cotton candy, and all the things, and then your dad selling hot dogs, and boy, that seemed like an amazing life because he worked part of the year and had fun the rest of the year. So on one way, it's like, well, that's where it's at. Let me do that. Let me work and then have fun. And then football came in. Yeah.
After I left Boston University, I was able to get enrolled at Pratt Institute, which has a restaurant and hotel management course. So because by then our popcorn and cotton candy stands had turned into hot dog and hamburger stands, and I had all that. So I figured that was my business. But all I ever wanted to do was sell enough hot dogs in the summer to not work in the winter. And there was this, so what does a jock do in 1968 or 1969 when they can't play ball anymore? They become a hippie, right? So my hair grew and my beard grew, and I had a little hippy-dippy apartment, and we never really knew who was going to be staying there and or with who. Excuse me. But those were those days. And there was this fellow named John Berman, and we used to argue over Nixon and Cambodia and Vietnam and all those things. And he kept saying to me, "You should be a lawyer. You should be a lawyer." And I said, well, no.
How did you meet John? He just happened to be in the same circles?
In the same circle, yeah. He was a Woody Allen kind of character, the kind of guy that has shoulders that are so sloped that if he was a mailman, the mailbag would fall off. He's the guy, He's the guy that when a glass door is being replaced, walks through the glass door because it hadn't been there the day before.
Yeah.
He's that guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, there was a character, I think Pigpen, always had the cloud over his head.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that was John. That was John. Anyway, John left around for a couple of weeks, and then he came and he gave me an envelope, and in the envelope was a postal money order made out to the Educational Testing Service for $350. And that was the entrance fee to the law school aptitude test. And I said, well, why'd you do this? He said, you should be a lawyer. Go take the test. So I went and took the test, and I did it pretty well on it. And one law school that hadn't even been accredited yet, a brand new law school, they took a chance on me. And I guess, one of the themes of your podcast is, when is that turning point? When is that something going to happen? And so, it's like the Dalai Lama says, that change is easy. Happens in a moment. It doesn't take any effort at all. But preparation for change can take a lifetime.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's all of these little things. There's Atticus Finch. There's the psychedelic experience, the feeling of the thing, Master Neat. All of this stuff, is just building up inside. And then very first week of this law school, we're sitting in this lounge that hadn't even been finished its construction yet. And somebody said, what kind of a lawyer do you want to be? And so all of us, we're just getting to know each other. Everybody's going around, I want to be this kind of lawyer, I want to be that. And it came to me, and I had no idea. I didn't even know why I was there. And I said, I want to be a judge. And when I said it, there was this feeling, and I said, oh my God, I might actually amount to something. There may be some work that I'm going to do in my life that's going to be important. And there was no stopping me after that.
Interesting. So like that, you allowed to give yourself permission that you could do and become more. Like you kind of went there because your friend believed in you. You tried it and you're like, okay, I guess this is just the next right thing. Thanks, buddy. Wow. And then you started believing.
Yeah.
And in that moment, did you think it was going to be through law? Or you weren't quite sure?
Yeah. No, I mean, the memory of Atticus Finch and Don Quixote, and of course there was a lot of environmental. We had the very first Earth Day was in those days. Very first Earth Day was in 1970 something. So this was the time, that we were talking about. We were talking about, hippies and protest and freedom and communes and all that kind of stuff was going on. So becoming socially awake and aware was part of the culture of the time. And I should tell you, of course, that John Berman, who was a heroin addict, and we pulled him out of shooting galleries in Harlem a couple of times. Well, he went clean when I got admitted. And he came down to Miami and went to Miami-Dade Community College, and it was his intention to become a private investigator. And I was going to be, well, I don't know if this reference might be a little too old, but he was going to be the Paul Drake to my Perry Mason. Paul Drake was Perry Mason's investigator. Yeah. And he stayed with me all through law school and all through studying for the bar and all through the job application and all through that. And then I got hired by Janet Reno as a felony prosecutor. And the fourth day after I got sworn in, I came up from court, and my secretary asked me if I knew a John Berman and told me that they found him dead in Miami Beach from an overdose. 4 days after I was sworn in. So,
how did your secretary even know to ask you that?
Oh, because the police, the Miami Beach police found him, and they saw my name, they found in his apartment, so they knew I was at the DA's office, so they called the DA's office to find me and left the message with the secretary, and the secretary told me. He had met a girl, and she decided that she asked him if he wanted to get high, and he gave in to the temptation, and he forgot that over 4 years his tolerance had gone down. And he took a dose that he would have been able to handle, but he couldn't handle.
Yeah.
And he died. So, again, we get to that question about synchronicity, you know?
Yeah.
So I get to, with all of those questions, you get to decide what you're going to choose to believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always felt, since a belief system was never thrust on me, it was always mine to choose. I choose to believe that John was sent here for that specific purpose of making me a lawyer, and that my entire career was to honor that.
It's beautiful. He definitely was a very important, like there's one of my friends says there's flag people, right? There's a lot of people and some people are flag people, and there's something that's going to happen because of their influence and their impact on your life that yours is going to alter in some way. So he was definitely seems like a very helpful flag person. How did that affect you though? Because now in your first few, it's just days into this seemingly amazing dream. How did that influence your path or the things that you studied or how you worked with people?
Well, I think that it's probably fortunate that I was a prosecutor, because although these days with what's going on at the Department of Justice, which I consider to be an existential heartbreak, there is an attack. I don't care what party you're with or whether you call yourself conservative or liberal, there is no question that there is an attack on the rule of law. And there is a large percentage of people in this country that feel that democracy's days are over, that it's too slow, it's too burdensome, there's too much argument, that we need to have strong leaders because we're in critical situations. Mm-hmm. There are other people that feel democracy is still the best answer. And that's where we see this divisiveness that's going on between us. But as a prosecutor, and like I say, you can't tell that from the Department of Justice today, but as a prosecutor, your job is not to win cases. Your job is to do justice. And if you don't think that, a person is guilty of something, then you look to find out what's going on and look very critically at the evidence, and if it needs to be dismissed, you dismiss it. Yep. It's not about winning or losing. Matter of fact, Janet Reno always used to say, because we prosecutors, we would screen the new cases. I would get a police officer and the victim would come in and they'd talk us, we'd take sworn testimony from them. We'd listen to it and evaluate whether or not it was a misdemeanor or felony or no crime at all. And very often you had to tell a police officer, no, I'm not going to file your case.
Yeah.
This is a misdemeanor. And Janet Reno used to say to us, until you make a decision to file this as a felony, you need to think of yourself as a defense attorney. You look for every reason not to file it. If you can knock it down to a misdemeanor, knock it down to a misdemeanor. If you can dismiss it, dismiss it. Because if you file it, you better win it. So you better be sure, in your own mind, that this case can go through to a conviction. Otherwise, you got no business filing it. And so she was a wonderful boss to work for, because she gave us that freedom and that ability to make those, decisions. And so, I grew up for 5-6 years in the DA's office, and that gives you a true love of the wonderful the wonderful balancing of weights, and it gives you a good solid foundation of what the law aspires to be.
Yeah.
And, if you try to follow that aspiration, we're all faulty and we all make mistakes. We understand that, and the system's not perfect. We understand that. But it aspires to perfection. Mm-hmm. And I guess that's the Don Quixote thing, to dream the impossible dream.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then Master Nee, his teaching, which, I can sum that up, came to me after him. It came to me again and again and again at various times. Because one time we asked him, why they call you master? And he said, well, because I've mastered life.
Interesting,
And
right?
he
Like in
giggles and
martial
walks
arts, it's
away.
like after you're like
Yeah.
a fourth or fifth black belt, right? Like, so they had some
Right.
structure there, you know?
So,
Interesting.
but then we said, okay, so what does it mean to master life? And then he turned and he was serious and he said, when you have learned to interfere with the natural flow of things the least and expend the smallest amount of energy to gain the desired result, you've begun to master life. And, which oftentimes requires just a lot of patience,
Yeah.
And later on, Judge Jerry Kogan, who was one of the felony judges who eventually became justice of the Florida Supreme Court, in Miami, the Justice Building has 14 felony courtrooms in it.
Wow.
14 felony, and all of the calendars are called on Monday morning. That means all of the cases that are set for the entire week are all called in all 14 courtrooms at the same time, 9 o'clock on Monday. So at 9 o'clock on Monday, it is a madhouse.
Madhouse. So all potential jurors, if you're signed up and you get called in Miami, chances are, if that case is going to actually go, you're going to have something to do for a period of time.
Well, most cases try in about 1 or 2 days,
Oh, that's pretty good. Yeah.
maybe 2 or 3 days. It's very rare that you have a case that goes longer than a week. The big cases do, but
Yeah.
very rare. But you have to work your way through all. It's standing room only in the courtrooms. The air conditioner can't handle the heat. Looks like papers all over. It looks like a war room.
Yeah.
Except in Judge Kogan's courtroom. Except in his courtroom.
Interesting.
And you went down to his courtroom, and everybody had a seat, and it was cool. It's like an oasis, and everything was happening, and it was happening calmly. And he was always up on the bench. And he goes, "Well, I think that we'll continue that one, and no, this one's going to go to trial."
So his courtroom has a
Was-
different
was-
everything about it.
And he became one of my mentors. And I went into his chambers once, and I said, "Judge Kogan, do you have less cases than everybody else? Well, what's the scoop? You ever walk around here on a Monday and see these other courtrooms?" And he goes, "Yes, Bob, I have." And I said, well, what accounts for it? And he said, "Well, Bob, I think that a lot of judges, they just, let their emotions. It's like they feel like they're in a contest with the lawyers. Lawyer wants a continuance, and they have to say no. But maybe you should give them the continuance because the case isn't ripe. And a lot of times they want to go to trial, and you look at it and it's not ripe, and if you go to trial, you're going to have to do it over. So you let it go." He says, "It's like this, Bob. If you try to pick an apple and it's not ripe, you got to yank and you got to pull and you got to twist, and it comes off and it's sour. And if you wait too long, it drops and rots. But if you pick it just right, it's easy and it's sweet." And that goes right back to Master Ning. Allow things
That you met from
come-
another George, right? So it's like apparently
From
people
them-
named George are kind of calm and have it together,
Yeah. So that's one of the big lessons in life is that we all think that we have to work harder, and you can accomplish so much more if you allow things to ripen of their own accord, and just pluck it when it needs that little bit of plucking.
Interesting. So interesting. Okay. All right. So, all right. Now we're going to go back to you. You went to North Carolina. You do all this stuff for Alamance County and kind of doing public service. And then what? Because we didn't get to the transition that went from public service to kind of now. Or are you still doing public service?
No. 2015, I retired from the courts for the second time, and then they called me back because there weren't enough attorneys willing to take Department of Social Services child abuse cases to represent the parents, the abusers. And those are just people that have been taught wrong. You know, a lot of times we think about generational trauma, but we don't often think about generational traumatizing. It's not only the trauma victims that carry that burden and that pain from generation to generation, those parents, the parents
Yeah.
of the abusers. So our job is not so much to represent them legally, although it is, but it's also to help them change their lives so that they can get their kids back. If they have an addiction, they need to recover. If they have a bad temper, they need to learn emotional regulation, things like that. So I was called back to do that. But after Master Ni, I was doing things like Qigong and Tai Chi and other kinds of Taoist practices. And then when I came to North Carolina, there wasn't any Taoists here, so I started going to Buddhist temples. And Buddhism is all about meditation. So that's where I started meditating, and then a few years in, they asked me to be trained to be a teacher. So I started teaching meditation. Then in 2015, I retired from the courts. But within a few moments, Elon University
Yep.
called me to teach law, and I did. But they also had a spiritual center, and I was attracted to it and found out that they were interested in meditation, and also that the folks at Duke University had developed a way of teaching meditation that was evidence-based and really worked. When I came out of the 2-year training that I went through in Vipassana, Tibetan type of meditation, it just doesn't work in the West. You can't say, hey, listen, come and sit with me for an hour once a week and then sit for 30 minutes a day, and in 2 or 3 years you're going to get some insights. That don't work.
Yeah.
But they found a way to use a digital infrastructure where the teacher and the students actually communicate through the app in their computer every single day. My students now, they developed this at Duke. So my students now will meet with me once a week for about an hour and a half, and I'll teach them another technique or two.
Yeah.
They practice that every single day, but then they write a reflection on their app. And that reflection comes to my dashboard. And every morning I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, as crazy as that is. I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I look at my 15 reflections and I answer every one of them. And I give them little tips, and I help them to understand that why they thought they were not doing it, they actually were doing it.
Yeah. Interesting.
And helping them get over the little hurdles, because we all have misconceptions about what meditation is. We think it's about quieting the mind and about peace, but it's not. It's about building resilience and strengthening the mind, making it stronger, with the idea being that I can't be peaceful just because I want to be peaceful.
Yep.
But I can be peaceful if my mind becomes so strong that the little things in life that used to bother me become trivial.
Yes.
So if I can strengthen my mind, then the annoyances become easier to handle.
Yes.
And the peace comes from not being annoyed by all the stuff that used to annoy you because you're that much stronger.
Yes. I do they're all related. They're all related because it's all part of the same big thing. But Azad Shamin, Stanford professor, had this book, Positive Intelligence, and he kind of boiled it into saboteurs, the things that are sabotaging your success, and sage. So it's like, first you're going to diagnose what are the things that are sabotaging you. Like, what operating system are you running from, or, running on? And mine was like, when I was probably the 2 to 4 year old, that's how I took in a lot of these observations, became a lot of who I was, where I needed to be. And I carried along a lot of those things, hyperachieving, controlling. Yeah, those were my main. Everybody has a judge, and allowing those to kind of be the default program. I didn't know that it was the default program. I didn't know, because you have performance, relationships, and well-being, and performance was great, but my relationships and well-being were not so much. And then hearing, therapists, and then I'll try medicine. I'm like, well, okay, I'm trying to fix the root, not cover it, right? I'm not trying to take a Tylenol to tell me I don't have a headache. I'm trying to figure out why I had a headache, and then just meditation. I never knew, like, probably this Western thing, like, well, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? But I liked that mental fitness, mental resilience, that kind of approach, because I had something, and that's probably, I imagine, what the app that you're offering, that is part of how you were trained, give you practical things to do to build up those muscles, to build up those things, so your mind works more for you than against you. And having the things.
It's really kind of simple. It's about building in perpetual failure and having to start over.
Love it.
It builds it in. And the instructions are simple enough. Tell yourself that you want to pay attention to this candle. Then start paying attention to the candle. 25 seconds, maybe, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
And then your mind goes off thinking about what you had for lunch yesterday and what you got to say that something again later and how you're going to do on your interview. But at some point, Carolyn, it's like this. How many times have you been listening to somebody and your mind wandered?
If the easier question would be, how many times have I not?
Right. Yeah. But every single time that happened, something in your brain told you and reminded you and helped you to notice that you stopped listening. It's a little feeling of kind of waking up, right? You were in a fog of rumination, and projection, and then all of a sudden you go, I wasn't listening, right? What is it that woke you up? It was the intention to listen that you started with.
Yeah.
You had an intention to listen. So your mind sees that you're not doing what you yourself said you wanted to do.
I see.
And it goes, psst, hey, you're not listening.
I see.
And that is like waking you up from the fog. Now, generally, you get a whole series of judgments after that. Oh, what am I going to do? I didn't hear what he said. How am I going to get him to repeat it without letting him know that I wasn't listening? Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And then eventually, all that kind of quiets down. Then what do? You go back and you start listening again, right? Mm-hmm. Then your mind might drift again and you do the same thing. That's exactly what meditation is. You say that you're going to pay attention to the candle and your mind wanders just like real life. And then eventually you will go, I'm not paying attention to the candle. And then there's all this judgments. But here's where you strengthen your mind. You simply start over and you say, let me bring my attention back. Let me begin again. Let me begin again. And then you fail. And then you begin again. And then you fail. And then you begin again. And what you're doing is you're teaching yourself that no matter how many times I fail, no matter how big the failure is, I can always begin again. And resilience is the ability to begin again. So it is a mental mechanism to train yourself, to give yourself the strength and the mental pathway to simply begin again. I got knocked down, I can stand back up. So this is, and it is from that strengthening, knowing that you can always begin again, that the peace of not having to catastrophize and worry about the future, it doesn't matter what's going to happen in the future because I can always begin again.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what happened in the past because I can always begin again.
I love the Henry Ford quote, failure is the opportunity to begin again more intelligently. I had that on my grad school cubicle wall. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, Henry Ford, all these, one of the greatest inventors of all time. And he's embracing failure, right? And so then in grad school, I was studying fatigue and fracture and failure. And so I was like, I'm going to become really good at beginning again more intelligently,
Right.
Oh, that's so cool.
And so, even though I might explain that to my students at the beginning of the class, it takes 2 or 3 weeks before I start getting this is what you meant.
Yeah.
Oh, because it has to be experiential.
So yes, there's not the difference between knowledge and knowing, right? The knowledge, you read it, the knowing, you embody it, practice it, and actually do it. Yes. Oh, this is beautiful. I appreciate I'm sure we could talk for like weeks and weeks and weeks. And we may have to, talk again to get some new insights and new things. But for now, how do people, if they're not an Elon student, then how do they have the opportunity to learn from you, embrace this beauty of life and calm and learning a new skill of meditation or all the other things that you help with?
Well, I'm in another period of transition because I do have a website, and it's called wiseandhappylife.com, all one word. But I've decided that I want to move away from this idea of website class orientation stuff.
Yep.
And I want to get more into community building.
Oh,
And so right now, I mean, my website's still there and everything is still on it, wiseandhappylife.com. And if you go to Substack, I have a blog, the Wise and Happy Life blog, and I have a podcast, the Wise and Happy Life podcast. And I'll give you all those links. But what I'm going to be doing is creating a community of well-being where people like yourselves could have a couple of rooms, and I'll have a couple of rooms, and in my rooms there might be pre-recorded guided meditations or instructional manuals, or there might be events that I can have where people can come and engage, and a room where there's a feed where people can discuss things, and another room where there's new announcements, and like I say, get to collaborate with some good folks like you, and you can have
Absolutely.
your own rooms and build a community, kind of like a Reddit,
yeah. Yeah.
but specifically for well-being, nutrition, and living a wise and happy life.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's beautiful. So that's something you're developing as we speak to get that kind of going. That's amazing.
As we speak.
I love it because it brings in so many of these elements, allows you to meet people where they are, allows that sense and to realize, like, I'm not the only one who's had this thought. Maybe I'm the only one with this specific thought, but there are others who've had similar thoughts, and kind of that camaraderie and lifting each other as we all climb. I love, love, love that. Please do keep me appraised at how I can support that mission and
Sounds
make
great.
the impact. Yes. I love it. Well, now from this perspective, I always love to ask people, how do you define authentic success for you now?
It's what makes you happy. Now, you might have to define happiness, but the Dalai Lama said that the purpose of life is to be happy. And I believe that all the great wisdom teachers, we think, the common idea is that Jesus and Lao Tzu and the Buddha, they all came to make us better people so that we would have a better world. But I don't think that was their motive. I think their motive was, please be happy. And it just happens to be coincidental that the way to be happy is through the things they taught: to be kind, to be generous, to be graceful, to be aware, to be reflective, and to be engaged.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Bob, thank you so much for sharing so much of yourself, your wisdom, your story, your journey, your insight, your learnings, all of the things. I genuinely, genuinely appreciate every single second of it.
Yes, yes. Well, I will thank you in the same way that I thank my students. I will say thank you for letting me do the things that I like to do.
Love it. Love it. Thank you, Bob.
Okay.
Bob, thank you for bringing such honesty and depth to this conversation. Your story helps us understand the space between pressure and purpose, the internal boundary that signals it is time to change course, and the clarity that comes when we finally listen. Your journey into meditation offers a grounded path for anyone feeling the strain of misalignment, and I'm grateful for the wisdom you shared. Thanks for listening to Your Next Success with Dr. Carolyn Sangal. Remember, authentic success is yours to define and includes aligning your career to support the life you want. Thanks for listening to Your Next Success with Dr. Carolyn Sangal. Remember, authentic success is yours to define and includes aligning your career to support the life you want.